My name is Jack Carter. Before I traded my world for a 10 by 10-foot room in the sky, I was just another cog in the corporate machine. For 8 years, I worked as a mid-level project manager for a logistics company in Seattle. My days were a monotonous blur of spreadsheets, conference calls, and the artificial chill of an air-conditioned office. I lived in a small apartment where the constant hum of traffic was my lullaby, and my most meaningful relationship was with the barista, who knew my coffee order by heart. The decision to leave wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was a slow erosion of the soul. I was 31, unattached, and felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were watching my own life from a great distance. The wilderness had always been a distant dream, a romantic notion I'd read about in books. So, when I stumbled upon a job posting for a seasonal fire lookout in the Kootenai National Forest of Montana, it felt less like a choice and more like a lifeline. The pay was surprisingly good, a testament, I assumed, to the extreme isolation the job entailed. For me, that isolation wasn't a drawback. It was the primary selling point. The application process was surprisingly straightforward, almost suspiciously so. A few online forms, a background check, and a single, crackly phone interview with a man named Henderson, the district ranger. His voice was like gravel rolling downhill, and he wasted no time on pleasantries. "You understand what this job is, son?" he'd asked. "It's not a vacation. It's you, the sky, and a million acres of trees that want to catch fire. You see smoke, you radio it in. That's it. You'll be alone. I mean truly alone. For months. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir. I believe I can," I'd replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We'll see," he grunted, and that was that. A week later, I received an email with a start date and a list of supplies to bring. I sold my car, put my few possessions in storage, and bought a one-way bus ticket to Libby, Montana. The journey itself was a process of shedding my old skin. With every mile east, the concrete jungle of Seattle gave way to rolling hills, then sprawling plains, and finally, the jagged, imposing peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Henderson met me in Libby. He was exactly as I'd pictured, tall, leathery, with a face carved by wind and sun, and eyes that seemed to hold the vast, empty landscape in their gaze. We didn't talk much on the 2-hour drive in his dusty Forest Service pickup. The paved road quickly became a gravel one, which then devolved into a deeply rutted dirt track that seemed to claw its way up the mountainside. The forest pressed in on all sides, a dense, silent wall of pine and fir. Finally, he pulled over where the track became impassable. "This is as far as the truck goes," he said, gesturing with his chin towards a steep, narrow trail. "Tower's a 2-mile hike from here. Let's get your gear." The hike was grueling. We loaded my supplies onto a pack mule he had tethered nearby, and I followed him up the switchbacks, my city lungs burning in the thin mountain air. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the trail and the occasional cry of a hawk circling high above. And then I saw it. Perched atop the highest peak, like a lonely sentinel, was the Thistle Peak Lookout. It was an old structure, built on a 50-foot steel frame, The cabin at the top was small, with glass windows on all four sides, surrounded by a narrow catwalk. It looked both incredibly vulnerable and stubbornly permanent against the endless blue sky. Henderson led me up the steep, clanging metal stairs. The view from the top stole my breath. It was a 360-degree panorama of raw, untamed wilderness. A sea of green, ridgeline after ridgeline, stretched to the horizon in every direction. There wasn't a single sign of human civilization. No roads, no buildings, no lights. Just the mountains and the sky. It was the most beautiful and the most intimidating thing I had ever seen. "Your world," Henderson said, his voice flat. The cabin was Spartan but functional. A small bed was folded against one wall. A wood, burning stove stood in the corner. And a desk with a map table and an old-fashioned radio sat by the window. The centerpiece of the room was the Osborne fire finder, a brass instrument used to pinpoint the location of smoke. Henderson gave me a quick, no-nonsense tour. He showed me how to work the radio, how to log weather patterns, how to use the fire finder. He pointed out the cistern that collected rainwater and the outhouse a short, terrifying walk from the base of the tower. As the sun began to dip towards the western peaks, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, he prepared to leave. He placed a set of keys on the desk and then pulled a single laminated sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. It was typed, the letters slightly faded. "One last thing," he said, his face unreadable. "Your predecessor left this, said it was important. Most lookouts have their little quirks, their routines. This one," he was insistent. He slid the paper across the desk. I picked it up. At the top, in bold LS far stagaliv, ATTHSTLEP, I chuckled, assuming it was some kind of rookie hazing. "Staying alive. Sounds a bit dramatic." Henderson didn't smile. He just held my gaze for a long moment. "Just rid them, son, and follow them. Don't ask me why. I just hire the bodies to fill the towers. What happens up here is between you and the mountain." He turned and left without another word. I listened to his heavy boots clang down the stairs, then the sound of his footsteps fading down the trail with the mule. And then, for the first time, the silence returned. But this time it was different. It was heavier, deeper. I was truly alone. I looked down at the paper in my hand. The light from the setting sun cast long shadows across the small cabin. I took a deep breath and began to read. 1. During a thunderstorm, disconnect the radio antenna and do not touch any metal surfaces. Stay in the center of the room. This is common sense. 2. Do not leave the catwalk for any reason between sunset and sunrise. Check your supplies before dark. The outhouse can wait until morning. 3. From time to time, you may hear what sounds like singing on the wind, especially on moonless nights. It is not human. Do not listen too closely, and do not try to find its source. It is the wind, and only the wind. 4. You might see a figure at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the clearing. It will be tall and pale. Do not acknowledge it. Do not stare at it. It feeds on attention. Look away and it will lose interest. Eventually, 5. Observe strict radio silence between 300 a.m. and 400 a.m. This is the listening hour. Do not transmit for any reason. If another station tries to contact you during this time, it is not another station. Do not answer. 6. The old iron bell at the base of the tower is rusted through. It cannot ring. If you hear it ring once, go to the radio desk. The old, disconnected rotary phone next to the radio will ring. Answer it. Say nothing. Listen to the message, then hang up. Forget what you heard. 7. This is the most important rule. Never, under any circumstances, let anyone or anything inside the tower after dark. They might sound like a lost hiker. They might sound like Henderson. They might even sound like someone you love. They will beg. They will plead. They will scream. Do not open the door. You are the lookout. You must keep watch. And you must keep the door locked. I read the list twice, then a third time. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a joke. The tone was too serious, too specific. The mundane first rule made the others feel chillingly plausible. My rational mind screamed that it was an elaborate prank. A ghost story designed to spook the new guy. But Henderson's dead, serious expression, his warning, I walked out onto the catwalk. The last sliver of sun had vanished, and the sky was a deep, bruised purple, studded with a billion stars. The air grew cold quickly. The wind whispered through the steel struts of the tower. And for a terrifying second, I thought I could almost make out a melody within the sound. I shook my head, my heart pounding. It's just the wind. It's just a prank. I went back inside, the metal door shutting with a solid, final, sounding thud. I slid the heavy deadbolt into place, the sound echoing in the tiny cabin. I looked out the window, down at the clearing 50 feet below, now shrouded in impenetrable darkness. The forest was no longer a beautiful sea of green. It was a black, fathomless ocean. I spent the rest of the night with my back to the wall, a camp lantern hissing beside me, rereading that list of rules until the words were burned into my memory. My grand escape from the city suddenly felt like I had traded one cage for another, much smaller, much higher, and infinitely more terrifying. The peace I had craved was gone, replaced by a single, gnawing question that whispered on the wind. What, exactly, was I supposed to be watching for? Smoke, or something else? That first night, as the wind howled and the old tower groaned around me, I learned the first true lesson of Thistle Peak. The deepest silence isn't empty. It's listening. The first 2 weeks at Thistle Peak were deceptively peaceful. I fell into a rhythm that was governed by the sun and the sky. My days began just before dawn, the horizon slowly igniting in soft pastels. I'd make coffee on the small propane stove, step out onto the chilly catwalk, and watch the world wake up. The job itself was simple, almost meditative. Every hour, I'd do a slow 360-degree sweep with my binoculars, scanning the endless ocean of trees for the faintest whisper of smoke. I'd log the weather, temperature, wind speed, humidity, in a thick, leather-bound ledger. The rest of the time was my own. I read through the small library of paperbacks left by previous lookouts. Stories of adventure and mystery that felt right at home in this wild place. I listened to music on a small, battery-powered player. The melodies a stark contrast to the profound silence. I did push-ups and sit-ups until my muscles burned. The physical exertion a welcome distraction. The isolation I had craved was absolute, and for a while, it was bliss. The city, with its noise and its demands, felt like a distant, half-forgotten dream. The list of rules remained tacked to the wall, a silent, unnerving presence. I tried to rationalize it, to strip it of its power. It was a prank, I told myself. The product of a lonely mind, a way for my predecessor to personify the strange sounds and shadows of the deep wilderness. The singing on the wind, just the acoustics of the wind whistling through the steel tower. The pale figure, a sun, bleached log, or a trick of the light at dusk. The radio silence, a quirky personal ritual. The bell, the phone, the warning about visitors. All just elements of an elaborate ghost story. I almost convinced myself. Almost. The memory of Henderson's grim face, his stark warning, kept the seed of doubt alive. The tranquility began to unravel during the third week. It was a moonless, starless night. The kind of oppressive darkness that feels like a physical weight. A storm was brewing to the west, and the wind had picked up, howling, moaning, and shrieking around the tower like a living thing. I was reading by the light of my lantern when I first heard it. It was faint, woven into the fabric of the wind's howl, but it was unmistakably there. A melody. It was high and ethereal, a wordless, sorrowful tune that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was etchingly beautiful, yet it sent a primal shiver down my spine. Rule 23 flashed in my mind, as clear as the typed letters on the page. It is not human. Do not listen too closely, and do not try to find its source. It is the wind, and only the wind. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to rush out onto the catwalk, to strain my ears against the gale and pinpoint the source. But Henderson's voice echoed in my memory. Just follow them, son. With trembling hands, I rummaged through my pack until I found a pair of foam earplugs. I shoved them deep into my ears, but I couldn't block out the memory of the sound. I sat there for hours, the wind rattling the windows, until the melody finally faded, or perhaps I just willed myself to stop hearing it. I told myself it was an auditory illusion, my brain creating patterns out of the chaos of the storm. But the fear it had sparked was real, and it lingered long after the wind had died down. A few days later, Rule 24 made its presence known. The sun was setting, bathing the landscape in a warm, golden light. It was my favorite time of day, a time when the world felt calm and safe. I was doing my evening scan with the binoculars, sweeping them across the familiar ridgelines. As I brought my view back to the clearing directly below the tower, I saw a flash of white against the deep green of the pines. I lowered the binoculars for a second, blinking, then raised them again, zeroing in on the spot. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a log. It wasn't a patch of snow. It was a figure. It stood just inside the tree line, partially obscured by the shadows of the ancient firs. It was tall, impossibly so, and slender to the point of being skeletal. Its color was a stark, sickly white, like a mushroom that had grown in utter darkness. It was perfectly still, and though I couldn't make out any features, I felt an overwhelming, bone-deep certainty that it was watching me. Do not acknowledge it. Do not stare at it. It feeds on attention. Look away and it will lose interest. Eventually, my hands started to shake violently. Every instinct screamed at me to keep watching, to analyze it, to understand what I was seeing. But the rule was a frantic, desperate command in my head. I ripped the binoculars from my eyes and stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. I forced myself to turn away, to face the inside of the cabin. I grabbed a book, my hands leaving damp. Sweaty prints on the cover. I stared at the page, the words swimming before my eyes, a meaningless jumble of black ink. The feeling of being watched was a physical pressure against my back. I could feel its gaze on me, a cold, hungry weight. I didn't dare look back. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, until the last of the light had faded from the sky, and the cabin was plunged into darkness. When I finally summoned the courage to look out the window again, the tree line was empty. The clearing was deserted. But I knew it had been there. The peace I had so carefully constructed was gone, replaced by a gnawing, ever-present dread. The incidents began to form, a terrifying new routine. The singing would return on the windiest nights, a siren song of the lonely peaks. The pale figure would appear at the edge of the trees, every few days, a silent, motionless spectator to my solitude. I started a new log, hidden in the back of the official weather ledger. In it, I documented every strange occurrence, noting the time, the weather, the moon phase, desperately trying to find a logical pattern, a rational explanation that would allow me to sleep at night. But there was no pattern. There was only the rules and the slow, creeping certainty that they were not a prank. The true test came a month into my stay. I was jolted awake from a restless sleep by an unnatural silence. The constant whisper of the wind was gone. The air was still and heavy. I glanced at my watch, its glowing face a small point of light in the oppressive dark. 3:15 a.m. The listening hour. My blood ran cold. I had completely forgotten about Rule 5. Observe strict radio silence between 300 m and 400 a.m. As I lay frozen on my cot, holding my breath, the radio crackled to life. Kesh? Thistle Peak, this is North Fork Station. Do you copy? The voice was familiar. It was Bill, the ranger from the North Fork Station, the man I checked in with every single morning. His voice was calm, professional, exactly as it should be. My training, my duty screamed at me to respond. But the rule was absolute. If another station tries to contact you during this time, it is not another station. Do not answer. My hand hovered over the radio's handset, my thumb near the transmit button. Jack, this is North Fork. We have an urgent wildfire, warning for your immediate area. A lightning strike from that storm system. You need to confirm you are receiving. Over. The voice knew my name. The warning was plausible, urgent. It was a direct order from a superior. This was my job. To ignore it felt like a dereliction of duty, a betrayal of the trust placed in me. My mind raced. Was this the one time the rule was wrong? Was I putting myself in real danger by staying silent? The voice came again, a note of frustration creeping in. Damn it, Carter. Answer me! This is a direct order. I squeezed my eyes shut, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the desk. I did not move. I did not speak. There was a long moment of hissing static. Then the radio crackled one last time. The voice that came through was no longer Bill's. It was distorted, stretched, and layered with a wet, bubbling sound, like someone speaking through water. "You're listening?" A wave of pure terror washed over me. It was a sound of pure malevolence, ancient and predatory. Then, as suddenly as it began, there was only static. I stared at the radio, my body trembling uncontrollably. The clock on my watch ticked past 400 a.m. The listening hour was over. The normal night sounds, the gentle breeze, the chirp of a cricket, slowly returned, but they brought no comfort. The silence had been violated by something monstrous. For the next week, I lived on a knife's edge. I barely slept. Every shadow, every gust of wind, sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. I considered packing my bags and hiking out, abandoning the tower and the madness it held. But the thought of walking those 2 miles, alone, through that forest, it was unthinkable. I felt safer 50 feet up, behind a locked door. On the 8th day after the radio incident, a new kind of weather rolled in. A thick, cold fog descended upon the mountain, a dense, white wall that erased the world. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. The tower felt like an island in a blank, featureless void. The silence was absolute, muffled by the oppressive dampness. I was pacing the small cabin, feeling more trapped than ever, when a sound cut through the fog. Clang. It was a single, impossibly clear metallic note. It came from the base of the tower. My heart stopped. Rule Fate 6. The old iron bell at the base of the tower is rusted through. It cannot ring. I had seen it myself on my first day. It was a massive orange rust, the clapper frozen in place. It was impossible. I stared, wide-eyed, towards the radio desk. As if summoned by the thought, the old, black rotary phone, the one Henderson had told me was disconnected decades ago, began to ring. Its shrill, piercing shriek was an obscenity in the fog, shrouded silence. It rang and rang, a relentless, terrifying summons. I knew what the rule said. I had to answer it. I had to listen. With legs that felt like lead, I stumbled towards the desk, my hand reaching for the cold, black receiver. The shrill ringing of the rotary phone was a physical assault. It cut through the thick, muffling fog and directly into my skull. Each ring seemed to last an eternity, a sound that had no place in this world of wind and wood and stone. My hand, slick with cold sweat, trembled as it hovered over the receiver. Every rational thought I had left told me to smash the phone, to rip its non-existent cord from the wall. But Rule Phase 6 was a chilling whisper. In my mind, answer it. Say nothing. Listen to the message, then hang up. Forget what you heard. Forget what you heard. How could a rule command you to forget? With a final, shuddering breath, I snatched the receiver from its cradle. The ringing stopped instantly. The silence that rushed in was somehow worse, thick with anticipation. I pressed the cold bakelite to my ear, my knuckles white, my jaw clamped so tight my teeth ached. I followed the rule. I said nothing. For a long moment, there was only static, a sound like rushing water or sand pouring through a sieve. Then, a voice emerged from the hiss. It was a woman's voice. Faint and distant, cracked with age and sorrow. It was a voice that sounded like dried leaves skittering across pavement. "I see you," she whispered, the words drawn out and raspy. "I see you in the little house in the sky. So alone. So far from the warm earth." A cold dread, sharper and deeper than any I had felt before, pierced through me. This wasn't a recording. This felt live. "He's coming for you, little bird," the voice rasped, a dry chuckle crackling through the line. "The door is strong, but your heart is weak. He can hear it beating." Thump, thump. Thump, thump. He loves that sound. The sound of fear. The static swelled, almost drowning her out. "Don't let him see the key," she hissed, her voice suddenly urgent, desperate. "He'll take the key. He'll take your name. He'll wear your skin. Don't let him." The line went dead. There was no click, no dial tone. Just an abrupt, empty silence. I stood frozen, the dead receiver still pressed to my ear. My mind reeled. The key. I glanced at the heavy iron key hanging from a nail by the door. My name. Wear my skin. The images the words conjured were grotesque, nightmarish. I slammed the receiver back onto its cradle, the clatter echoing in the small cabin. My legs gave out and I slid down the wall to the floor, my body shaking uncontrollably. Forget what I heard. It was impossible. The words were burned into my brain, a venomous poison seeping into every thought. The fog did not lift for 2 more days. I lived in a gray, featureless purgatory, 50 feet above a world that had ceased to exist. I couldn't see the tree line, so I didn't know if the pale figure was there, watching. The wind was dead, so there was no singing. There was only the oppressive silence, the ringing in my ears, and the old woman's words playing on a loop in my head. I stopped logging the weather. What was the point? The weather was fear. The humidity was dread. I rationed my food and water, my stomach in a constant, tight knot. Sleep offered no escape, only fragmented nightmares of a tall, pale thing wearing my face, a rusty key clutched in its white hand. I found myself talking to myself, whispering reassurances that it was all a hallucination, a product of the isolation and stress. But I didn't believe it. I had crossed a threshold. The flimsy veil between my world and something else had been torn away. Thistle Peak wasn't just a lookout tower. It was a cage. Or maybe it was a lighthouse. A tiny point of light in an ocean of ancient darkness. And my job wasn't to watch for fire, but to keep the darkness at bay. On the 3rd day, the fog finally began to recede. It didn't burn off. It withdrew, pulling back like a slow, gray tide, revealing the familiar green canopy below. The relief I expected to feel never came. Seeing the world again only made the threat feel more real. The sun felt like a spotlight. The forest felt like a stage, and I was the only actor, waiting for my cue. That afternoon, I heard the unmistakable sound of a truck engine grinding its way up the distant access road. It was Henderson. It had to be. He was due for my 1-month supply drop. A wave of hope, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. A real person. a connection to the world I had left behind. I would tell him everything. The rules, the singing, the figure, the radio, the phone call. He had to listen. He had to get me out of here. I watched through the binoculars as his truck came to a stop at the trailhead. I saw his familiar, lanky figure get out. Saw him unload boxes of supplies and strap them to the pack mule. The sight was so normal, so wonderfully mundane, that I almost cried. I watched him start the 2-mile hike up the trail. A slow, moving figure, disappearing and reappearing through the trees. The sun was beginning its slow descent by the time he reached the clearing at the base of the tower. He looked up and waved. I waved back, my hand shaking with relief. "Everything all right up there, Carter?" he yelled, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Never been better," I shouted back, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I couldn't tell him like this, not shout him across the distance. I had to wait until he was up here. "I'll just leave these supplies at the bottom of the stairs. No need for me to come all the way up," he called out. My heart sank. "Wait, come on up, Henderson. I've got a fresh pot of coffee on." He hesitated, looking up at the tower, then back down the trail. "It's getting late. I need to be back in Libby before midnight. Please," I said, my voice cracking with a desperation I couldn't hide. It's important." He stared up at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable from this distance. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "All right, son, but make it quick." I watched as he started the slow, methodical climb up the 50 feet of clanging, metal stairs. With every step he took, a piece of the tension inside me unwound. He was real. He was solid. He would understand. He would help me. He reached the top landing and knocked on the door. "It's me, Carter." I scrambled to the door, my hand reaching for the deadbolt. My fingers touched the cold metal, and I froze. Rule Phase 7, the last rule, the most important rule. Never, under any circumstances, let anyone or anything inside the tower after dark. The sun had just dipped below the highest western peak. The sky was on fire, but the forest below was sinking into deep shadow. It was officially after dark. They might sound like a lost hiker. They might sound like Henderson. My blood turned to ice. My hand recoiled from the deadbolt as if it were red hot. "Carter, you gonna let me in? It's getting cold out here," Henderson said, his voice muffled by the thick wooden door. It sounded exactly like him. The same gravelly tone, the same no-nonsense cadence. "Just a second." I stammered, my mind racing. It was him. It had to be him. I saw him drive up. I saw him hike the trail. This was paranoia. The rules had finally broken me. "What's the matter, son?" he asked. There was a subtle shift in his tone, a hint of something I couldn't place. "Everything okay?" "Did you see anyone on the trail?" I asked, my voice a weak whisper. There was a pause. "No, not a soul. Just me and the mule." "Now open the door, Carter." "This isn't funny." I backed away from the door, my eyes wide with terror. It was him, but the rule was absolute, and Henderson himself had told me to follow it. I can't," I said. "What do you mean, you can't?" He snapped, his voice sharp, angry. "Open this damn door right now!" "That's an order." "They will beg. They will plead. They will scream. "I can't, Henderson! The rules!" I cried out, my voice cracking. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice came again, it had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by a soft, wheedling, almost gentle tone. "Oh, the rules," the voice cooed. "He told you about those, did he? Silly superstitions. The ramblings of a lonely old man. They don't mean anything, Jack. You know that? It's just me out here. It's your friend, Henderson. I'm cold, Jack. Please, just let me in." The sound of my own name on its lips made my skin crawl. Henderson never called me Jack. It was always Carter. Or son. I scrambled backwards until my back hit the far wall, my eyes glued to the door. "You're not Henderson," I whispered. A low chuckle came from the other side of the door. It was a dry, rattling sound. The same sound I'd heard from the old woman on the phone. "Not anymore," the voice whispered. Then it began to scream. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and hunger. A sound that clawed at the inside of my skull. It wasn't human. It hammered on the door, the blows shaking the entire cabin, rattling the windows in their frames. I squeezed my eyes shut and covered my ears, but I couldn't block out the sound, or the single, terrifying thought that now consumed me. The door was strong, but the 50-foot steel tower holding me in the sky had windows on all four sides. The inhuman screaming from the catwalk was the sound of a predator denied its meal. The furious hammering on the door sent vibrations through the floor, up my spine, and into my teeth. I was a rat in a cage, and the snake was coiling around the bars. I scrambled away from the door, my back pressing hard against the opposite wall, my eyes darting between the shaking door and the vast, black panes of glass that surrounded me. The door was strong, but the windows were my terror. The hammering stopped. An unnerving silence fell, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. I strained my ears, listening. Where had it gone? A soft tapping sound began on the window to my left. Tap. Tap. I turned my head slowly, my neck muscles screaming in protest. Pressed against the glass, illuminated by the faint starlight and the dying glow of the horizon, was a face. It was the face of the pale figure from the tree line. A long, bone, white oval, utterly featureless except for two dark, sunken pits where eyes should have been. It had no mouth, yet the voice of Henderson, twisted with a sick, sweet malice, whispered directly into my mind. "I can see you, Jack. There's nowhere to hide in a glass house." I screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure terror, and threw the heavy weather ledger at the window. It bounced off the glass with a dull thud, doing nothing. The face remained, its empty sockets fixed on me. It raised a long, white, multi-jointed finger and traced a line on the glass, leaving a greasy, phosphorescent trail. "The old woman told you about the key, didn't she?" The voice whispered in my head. "She was the one before you. She held on for a whole season, but she got careless. She dropped the key. Give it to me, Jack. It will be so much easier if you just give me the key." My eyes darted to the heavy iron key hanging by the door. The warning from the phone call echoed in my ears. "He'll take the key. He'll take your name. He'll wear your skin. I finally understood. The key didn't just lock the tower. It locked me in my own identity, my own body. It was the anchor that kept me from being replaced. No, I yelled, my voice hoarse. The face at the window contorted, the smooth white skin wrinkling like paper. The Henderson voice screamed in my mind, a blast of pure psychic rage. Then it was gone from the window. The hammering on the door began again, more frantic, more violent than before. It wasn't just trying to get in anymore. It was trying to tear the tower apart. I crawled under the map table, curling into a tight ball. It was a child's defense, pathetic and useless, but it was all I had. I shut my eyes and began reciting the rules over and over, like a prayer, a mantra against the madness. Rule 21C. Disconnect the antenna. Rule 22 don't leave the catwalk. Rule 23, it's only the wind. The assault continued for what felt like a lifetime. The creature circled the tower, its form a pale blur in the darkness, its voice a cacophony in my head. Sometimes Henderson, sometimes the old woman. Sometimes a chorus of whispers I couldn't understand. It clawed at the windows, the sound of nails on glass setting my teeth on edge. It threw its weight against the door, making the whole structure groan and sway. I stayed huddled under the table, lost in a haze of terror. I don't know when I lost consciousness, but I awoke with a start, not to a sound, but to a change in the light. A soft, gray luminescence was filtering through the windows. Dawn. The tower was silent. The air was still. I crawled out from under the table, my body a symphony of aches and pains. I crept to the window and looked out. The catwalk was empty. The clearing below was deserted. The first rays of the rising sun were tops of the eastern peaks. It was over. For now. But I knew I couldn't stay. Another night in this place would break what was left of my sanity. Survival was no longer about enduring the season. It was about surviving the next 12 hours. I had to leave. I had to risk the 2-mile hike through its forest in the daylight. My movements were frantic, clumsy. I stuffed a few bottles of water and some protein bars into my backpack. I grabbed the laminated list of rules, folding it carefully and putting it in my pocket. It felt like a talisman. Then, my hand shaking, I walked to the door and took the heavy iron key from its nail. Its cold weight in my palm was both terrifying and reassuring. I unbolted the door and eased it open, half expecting the creature to be standing there, waiting. But there was nothing. Only the crisp, cold morning air. I stepped out onto the catwalk and didn't look back. I practically ran down the 50 feet of stairs, my boots clanging a frantic rhythm of escape. At the bottom, I saw the supplies Henderson, the real Henderson, had left. The boxes were untouched. Nearby, the rusted bell was silent, but I saw fresh, deep scratches in the metal around it. The hike down was the longest 2 miles of my life. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The forest no longer felt beautiful or peaceful. It felt menacing, alive, and watchful. I clutched the iron key in my pocket, my knuckles white. I felt the weight of unseen eyes on my back the entire way. I didn't run, fearing that to show panic would be to invite pursuit. I just walked, a steady, determined pace, my gaze fixed on the trail ahead. When I finally saw Henderson's Forest Service truck through the trees, I almost collapsed in relief. I broke into a run, stumbling out of the tree line and into the small clearing where it was parked. It was empty. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. On the ground next to the door lay a worn leather wallet. I picked it up with a trembling hand. Inside was Henderson's driver's license, a picture of the same leathery, grim-faced man who had hired me. He had never made it back down the mountain. The thing that had climbed my tower, that had worn his voice, had gotten to him first. It hadn't just been mimicking him. It had consumed him. I threw my pack in the passenger seat and fumbled with the ignition. The keys were already there. The engine roared to life. A beautiful, deafening sound of civilization and escape. I slammed the truck into gear and spun the tires in the dirt, turning the vehicle around to face the long road down. As the truck straightened out, the headlights cut a path through the morning shadows. And there, standing at the edge of the woods where the trail began, was the pale figure. It was perfectly still, its featureless face turned towards me, its empty sockets seeming to drink in the light. It didn't move. It didn't have to. It was a silent promise, a statement. You are leaving, but you will never escape. I stomped on the accelerator. The truck shot forward, leaving the clearing and the silent, watching thing behind. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I drove for hours, my foot pressed to the floor, not stopping until the mountains were a distant, jagged line behind me, and the sun was high in the sky. I don't know what I'll do now or where I'll go. The corporate world seems like a paradise I can never return to. How do you explain on a resume that you spent a season fighting monsters that wear human skin? I still have the key. I can't seem to get rid of it. Sometimes late at night, when the wind howls just right, I think I can hear a faint, sorrowful singing. I live in a ground floor apartment now, with thick curtains I keep drawn at all times. In my wallet, tucked behind my driver's license, is a folded, laminated piece of paper. The ink is faded, but the words are as clear and as terrifying as the day I first read them. I know that one day, someone else will find a job posting for a seasonal fire lookout in the Kootenai National Forest. A new cog looking to escape the machine. And I wonder if I'll have the courage, or the cruelty, to pass the rules on, or if I'll just let them walk into that high, lonely place, unprepared for the things that wait in the silence, and for the most important rule of all. Some doors should never, ever be opened.